In late 2025, a surge of data slammed into internet infrastructure at 31.4 terabits per second. It was one of the largest and most destructive distributed denial of service attacks ever recorded. But the traffic wasn't originating from state-sponsored supercomputers or massive server farms. The data flooding the network was pouring out of baby monitors, smart TVs, and the Wi-Fi routers sitting on our desks. Authorities eventually tracked the source of this traffic. A coordinated operation by the U.S. Department of Justice and international partners managed to disrupt 4 distinct networks driving the attacks: Aisuru, Kimwolf, Jackskid, and Mossad. Together, these 4 networks had quietly enslaved over 3 million devices worldwide. They were causing massive commercial outages, and some of these hijacked networks were actively directing their attacks at IP ranges owned by the U.S. Department of Defense. These weaponized devices are hiding in plain sight in our own homes. Which raises a mechanical question. How do cheap, disposable consumer electronics generate enough power to threaten global internet infrastructure? To understand the mechanics, we have to look at what cybersecurity experts call the residential edge. Corporate servers are fortified with enterprise firewalls and dedicated security teams. Home networks are soft targets. Consumer electronics are built to be inexpensive. Devices like cheap routers rely on low-power MIPS processors and minimal built-in security. Buyers tend to plug them in, set them up, and never look at them again. Millions of these units are currently operating well past their end of life, running abandoned firmware that hasn't seen a security patch in years. The breach starts with an automated script. Somewhere on the internet, a computer is constantly pinging a massive grid of residential IP addresses, looking for exposed management ports, like Telnet or SSH, left open to the public web. When a scanner finds an open door, the malware bypasses the device's minimal security. It either exploits a known, unpatched bug, or it simply guesses the factory default password. In many cases, typing admin for both the username and password is all it takes to gain full access. Once inside, malware like the Aisuru payload installs itself directly into the device's temporary memory, or RAM. It deletes its own installation files to remain invisible to basic process monitors, and then establishes a silent outbound connection to a remote command and control server. At this point, the device is a fully compromised zombie. The homeowner can still browse the web and stream movies, completely unaware that a cybercriminal now dictates how their router's processing power is used. This brings us to Botnet as a service. A single operator, known as a bot herder, aggregates millions of these infected zombies into one massive, centrally controllable network. The herder then commercializes this infrastructure on dark web marketplaces. Anyone with malicious intent can log on and rent this devastating cyber firepower for as little as a few dollars an hour. When a buyer selects a target, the command and control server issues a single order. Instantly, millions of enslaved devices around the world execute the command, simultaneously bombarding the target server with a massive flood of UDP data packets. Back inside the home router, this attack triggers what engineers call an interrupt storm. The router's tiny silicon processor is violently bombarded by millions of low-level hardware signals, instructing it to generate and send these malicious packets. The CPU becomes completely saturated. It spends its available clock cycles handling the attack data, leaving zero processing power to manage the homeowner's actual internet requests. This means when a user experiences a dropped Zoom call or a buffering declick stream, it might not be a glitch from their internet provider. Their own router is likely choking on its active participation in a global cyber attack. The recent law enforcement operation was a tactical success because it successfully decapitated these networks. By seizing the domains and virtual servers used for command and control, authorities severed the operator's ability to issue new attack orders. But there is a terrifying caveat to this victory. The authorities only seized the control servers. The 3 million hijacked home devices are still physically sitting in living rooms, still infected with the malware. Without their commander, this zombie army is currently dormant. They aren't launching new attacks today, but the exact same structural vulnerabilities that allowed the initial infection remain wide open. This exposes a massive failure in our hardware supply chain. The system relies entirely on everyday consumers to actively seek out and manually update the firmware of cheap, disposable electronics that were never designed for long-term maintenance. Without universal security standards for the Internet of Things, manufacturers will continue shipping hardware with hard-coded credentials and minimal defenses. The stability of the global Internet is currently reliant on its cheapest, least secure links. Securing this network requires manual intervention. Users have to log into their hardware to change default factory passwords. Because the malware often lives in temporary memory, simply unplugging the device and plugging it back in can clear the active infection. And if a router or DVR has reached its end of life and no longer receives security updates, it needs to be thrown away. For decades, we relied on heavily guarded data centers and enterprise firewalls to keep the Internet secure. Today, the perimeter defense of the global Internet begins in our own living rooms.